All right, let's jump right into one of the most fascinating and, frankly, challenging contradictions in all of history, the papacy. For 2,000 years, it's been held up as this secret, divinely protected office. And yet, history is absolutely littered with popes who were, to put it mildly, anything but holy. That's what we're going to unpack here. This incredible paradox of how an institution can be seen as holy when the men running it were sometimes so deeply and shockingly sinful. So, here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll lay out the paradox itself. Then, we are going to stare right into that dark history, the age of scandal. After that, we'll get into the theology, the critical difference between the man and the office. And finally, we'll see how the church, according to its own teaching, managed to endure through all of it. Okay, so let's start with the paradox at the very heart of this. This isn't some new debate stirred up by modern critics. Nope. This is a fundamental tension that the church itself has been wrestling with for centuries. And this question cuts right to the chase, doesn't it? These words, debauchee, profligate, these aren't insults from enemies hundreds of years later. These are descriptions from people who were alive at the time, watching it happen. So how could the man who's supposed to be Christ's representative on earth be the source of such a massive scandal? To figure that out, we have to look at the history. Now, what's really fascinating here is that the church's own records don't try to sweep this under the rug. They actually acknowledge that there were these awful periods, times when the papacy was just consumed by political power grabs and moral rot. We're really zooming in on two specific eras. First, there's a period people often call the Dark Age of the papacy, running from the late 800s to the mid-1000s. And then you've got the High Renaissance. I mean, for all its incredible art, the papal court was often acting more like a corrupt kingdom than the spiritual center of the world. Get a load of this quote. It is just staggering. This isn't some rival or enemy of the church saying this. This is another pope. Pope Victor III is writing about the guy who came before him, Benedict IX, and he basically says he can't even put into words how horrible the man's behavior was. That tells you everything you need to know about how bad the leadership crisis got. This table gives you a real snapshot of the problem. I mean, you've got Pope John XII, called a young debauchee. Then there's Benedict IX, who was so out of control, he literally sold the papacy. Then you fast forward to the Renaissance, you get Sixtus IV, who is famous for his unblushing nepotism, basically using his power to make his own family rich. And of course, the infamous Alexander VI, who seemed way more interested in his own kids' careers than in, leading the church. So, you look at that scandalous history and you have to ask, how on earth did the whole thing not just crumble? Well, the answer is found in this really crucial theological idea that draws a bright, sharp line between the man himself and the mission he's been given. Okay, this slide right here is probably the single most important concept for understanding this whole paradox. The church claims papal infallibility, not personal impeccability. They are two totally different things. Infallibility is like a safeguard on the teaching. It's a protection from error, but only when a pope is officially defining a core belief for everyone. Impeccability, on the other hand, means being a perfect person who can't sin. The church has never claimed that for any pope. In fact, it kind of assumes they're sinners, just like everyone else. And it's not like a pope can just wake up and make an infallible declaration. No way. The conditions are incredibly strict and really specific. He has to be speaking ex cathedra, which means from the chair, in his official role. He has to be defining a doctrine, it has to be about faith or morals, and it has to be binding for the entire church. This is something that has happened very, very rarely in history. It protects the office's teaching, not the man's every thought. And what this means is if a pope writes a book or gives an interview or tweets something, that's just his personal thought. There is zero guarantee that it's free from error. And here's the connection back to our bad popes. Even the most corrupt ones, guys like Alexander VI, they never once met all four of these conditions to officially teach something false. Their personal sin never managed to corrupt the official teaching authority of the office itself. So keeping this man versus mission idea in mind, let's take a look at how the church claims it kept its core identity, what are called its marks, even when the leadership was, well, terrible. Traditionally, these are the four essential qualities the church says it's always had. That it is 1, holy, Catholic, and apostolic. The real challenge, of course, is to figure out how these could possibly still be true with some of those guys we just talked about sitting in the papal chair. So, first up, 1. This is all about unity. The argument is that the principle of having a single visible leader, the office of the papacy itself, was always held up as a core belief. The structure and the shared creed held the church together even when the actual person in the chair was unworthy or even when there were a couple of guys fighting over who was the real pope. But okay, this next one. This is the real sticking point, isn't it? We've just looked at popes accused of buying the office, of sacrilege, of just awful behavior. So how in the world could the institution they were leading possibly call itself holy? I mean, it seems like a total contradiction. But the answer is found in a surprisingly powerful idea. The answer is in this fantastic analogy. The argument from theologians is that the moral failings of individuals, even the Pope himself, are like spots on the sun. They're there, they're real, but they don't take away the essential brightness and nature of the sun itself. That holiness is said to live in the Church's pure doctrine, its sacraments, and of course in the lives of the countless saints, many of whom lived during these very same corrupt times. And finally, we have apostolic. This all comes down to the unbroken line of succession going all the way back to St. Peter. And the best way to think about this is with a legal analogy. Imagine a valid title to a piece of property. The title is legitimate regardless of the personal character of the person who currently holds it. In the same way, the authority and dignity of the papal office are seen as being passed down intact, totally separate from the worthiness of the man. And this final analogy, I think, just wraps the whole thing up perfectly. The light of a lamp isn't made dirty just because it passes through a dirty atmosphere. It's a powerful image for this whole idea, the belief that divine authority and truth can remain pure even when they're being channeled through a very human and sometimes a very, very flawed institution. A holy office, sometimes occupied by some very unholy men.